My name is Evelyn. I'm 36. And on that gray afternoon, I sat in the reading room of Harper and Longwell Law as still as the leather chair beneath me. The polished wood table gleamed under dim lights. Rain tapped faintly on the tall window panes. I watched as Nathan leaned toward the woman beside him, whispering something that made her giggle. She squeezed his hand, then turned to the little girl on her other side and adjusted the child's pink bow. The girl looked up and smiled. "Mommy," she said softly, tugging at the woman's sleeve. I didn't blink. I'd seen enough to prepare for this moment, but hearing it spoken aloud still twisted something sharp in my chest. That word once belonged to a future I tried to build, one that vanished quietly while I wasn't looking. Nathan didn't even glance my way. He hadn't since I walked in. He wore that same navy blazer I bought him for his interview with the conservatory board. It fit him too well now, almost as if the past had shrunk around him. Rebecca looked composed, elegant, even with her sleek, dark hair and silk dress, like a wife with nothing to hide and everything to gain. No one told me I couldn't come, but no one expected me to. When I entered the room, only the lawyer raised his eyes. I nodded at him, then took my seat at the far end of the table across from them. The same seat I had used once when Caroline insisted I join her for her estate planning back when she called me her daughter and not her ex-daughter-in-law. The air in the room felt heavy, like it carried things unsaid. I wondered if anyone else could feel it, that silent tension, the kind that sits between people who used to know each other too well. Nathan cleared his throat and took a sip from his water bottle. Rebecca leaned closer and rested her hand on his thigh. I didn't flinch, though part of me wanted to leave. Instead, I folded my hands in my lap and studied the pattern in the carpet. It hadn't changed since the last time I was here. The little girl kicked her feet gently beneath the table. She couldn't have been more than 5. Her hair was the same shade of honey blonde Nathan's mother once had. For a second, I wondered if Caroline ever braided it. I wondered if she ever called her grandma, or if she was too young to remember the woman who once told me that blood didn't matter, but loyalty did. I sat upright, calm, unreadable. That's what Caroline always admired. She once said I carried myself like a judge, never revealing too much too soon. But she also knew the difference between silence that came from peace and silence born of pain. I don't think anyone else at that table ever learned to tell the two apart. Rebecca turned to adjust her bag, and our eyes met only for a heartbeat. There was no apology in her gaze, just quiet triumph, maybe pity. I gave her nothing back, not even a blink. Let her believe I was broken, that I had come to grieve the woman who once protected me. Let her think I had no idea what was about to unfold. Nathan tapped the table with his pen. The lawyer opened his folder. Pages shuffled. The room hushed like a theater before the lights dim. Caroline's voice would speak next, but not through a phone call, not in a letter, not in person. Her words would come through documents sealed long before her final breath, and I was ready to listen. The first time I saw Nathan, he was singing with his eyes closed in a tiny coffee shop 2 blocks from my office. His guitar was slightly out of tune and his hair fell over one eye, but his voice had this raw edge to it that made everyone stop talking. I sat in the back, sipping a lukewarm latte, trying to finish a spreadsheet on my laptop. He noticed me not clapping when he finished. Later, he told me that's why he walked over. I thought he was arrogant at first. He asked me what I was working on, then sat down without waiting for an answer. He told me numbers scared him and that people like me probably had color-coded calendars. He wasn't wrong. But then he said it like it was a good thing, like being structured was a kind of poetry he couldn't write. We didn't make sense on paper. He moved through life like music. I followed checklists. But somehow we found rhythm. Our first date was at a flea market, not a restaurant. He bought me a broken clock and told me it reminded him of me because even when time stopped, I'd still try to fix it. I should have rolled my eyes. Instead, I laughed and kissed him for the first time that night in the parking lot. Nathan introduced me to Caroline 2 months later. I was nervous, too polished, too polite. She pulled me into a hug before I could shake her hand. That surprised me more than anything. She called me solid, said it like a compliment. I didn't realize until years later how rare that word was in her world. She lived surrounded by fragile things, glass sculptures, musicians, emotions. Maybe that's why she kept me close. When Nathan proposed, it wasn't with a ring, but a handwritten song. It was messy and full of metaphors that barely landed, but it made me cry. We got married in her backyard at 6:30 in the evening, just as the lights came on. Caroline wore navy and cried harder than my mother. She toasted to opposites, attracting and building something neither side could do alone. Our house was small but warm. I labeled everything in the pantry. He painted the ceiling of our bedroom with stars that only showed at night. On weekends, I paid bills while he taught guitar lessons. We shared the same toothbrush for a month because we kept forgetting to buy a second one. It was the kind of domestic chaos he adored, and the kind of stability I clung to. We talked about kids often. I had a file in my drawer labeled baby plans. He bought a tiny ukulele and hung it on the nursery wall before we even picked paint colors. Caroline started crocheting booties the moment we told her we were trying. She sent articles and herbal teas. She said we'd make good parents because we listened before we spoke and we fought like teammates, not enemies. Those were the years when I believed effort could fix anything. When love felt like a quiet room after a storm. I wasn't naive. I just thought we were the exception. The couple that made it work. The two puzzle pieces that didn't match until they did. Now when I look back, I wonder if we were building something real or just holding up a beautiful stage set. Still in those days, I loved him with everything I had. And I truly believed, that he loved me the same. It started with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that lingers after an argument that never really ends. Nathan stopped coming to bed at the same time. He'd say he was writing mixing working. I stopped asking. There's only so many times a woman can hear it's just stress before she stops believing it. We tried to have children for nearly 5 years. I tracked everything. Ovulation, body temperature, doctor's appointments. He came to most of them at first. Then he started forgetting. One day, I sat alone in a waiting room with my hands clenched in my lap while the nurse called our name twice before realizing I was alone. The tests showed nothing conclusive. Unexplained infertility, they called it. A phrase that sounds like science but feels like failure. I told him it wasn't his fault. He nodded but didn't really look at me. Caroline kept checking in. She brought soup, not advice, which I appreciated more than she knew. One night she texted me at 9:15 p.m. just to say she loved me. I cried in the bathtub with my phone resting on the edge. Nathan became a shadow. He still lived with me, but only physically. His mind was elsewhere. He started rehearsing later, leaving earlier, always half absent. His clothes smelled like a different brand of soap. His playlists changed. One evening, I saw a text on his phone when he left it on the counter. Just a name, Rebecca, and a timestamp. 10:30 p.m. It was a voice memo. I didn't listen. I didn't need to. Rebecca was in his music group. She sang backup, played keys, laughed too loud at his jokes. I'd met her once at a show. She'd said I was lucky to have him with a tone that didn't match the words. A week later, he told me he needed space. He said he might stay at the studio for a few nights. I nodded. I didn't ask when he'd be back. Caroline came by that weekend. She brought a basket of groceries and offered to clean out the guest room for me. I told her I wasn't ready. She said okay, and left flowers on the kitchen table. A few days later, I saw a charge on our joint credit card. Hotel. 2 nights. Then another at a restaurant I'd never been to. He stopped wearing his wedding ring. When I asked why, he said it made his finger itch. I finally saw them together at a Sunday market. It was bright out and they didn't notice me. Rebecca was wearing his flannel. She was holding a paper cup and laughing. Her other hand rested on her belly, round and undeniable. Nathan kissed her temple like it was a reflex. She leaned into it. I stood behind a vendor cart, frozen until my legs remembered how to move. He never told me. I never asked. The news came through friends, through whispers, through social media updates that I didn't even have to look for. People tag you in things without thinking. Pregnant glow. Expecting soon. Our little miracle. It wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. Like I had been a placeholder, a chapter he skimmed through on his way to a better story. I didn't scream. I didn't cry in public. I packed a box of his things, placed it by the door, and emailed him the next morning. I told him I'd be staying at Caroline's for a while. He never replied. Not to that email or the 2 after, but I saw his name come up on the account withdrawal history. Money moved just like he had. Out. Quiet. Final. The hospital room was quiet when I arrived. The kind of quiet you only find in places where people are preparing to leave for good. Caroline's skin looked thinner, almost translucent. Tubes snaked around her like vines. But when she opened her eyes and saw me, they were clear, focused. Still her. I sat beside her bed, my bag tucked against the chair leg. She didn't ask why I was there. She just reached out her hand, dry and cool, and I took it. We didn't speak for a few minutes. We didn't have to. With Caroline, silence never felt like distance. "You look tired," she finally said. I nodded. I wanted to tell her everything at once, but I'd rehearsed it too many times. I opened the folder I brought, placed it on her tray table. Inside were printed statements, copies of hotel bills, charges to the joint account that didn't belong to either of us, photos of Nathan with Rebecca at the lake house, 2 contracts from a nanny agency we never used. Caroline didn't flinch. She looked through each page slowly, her fingers steady. When she got to the receipts from the retreat in Oregon, she paused. "That's where she took him," she said. "That was supposed to be your anniversary trip, wasn't it?" "It was," I replied. But Nathan said the timing wasn't right. He needed space to work on the album, so he went without me. Took someone else. Caroline closed the folder and set her hands in her lap. I waited, unsure what she'd say. She had always loved her son, sometimes blindly, but she had also called me her anchor more times than I could count. I braced for her to defend him. Instead, she asked something softer. "Do you still love him?" I looked at her, surprised. Part of me wanted to say no to protect myself from the truth, but I didn't come here to lie. "I do," I said. Or I did. Or maybe I still do in that old way. The version of him I thought I had. But I think I love myself more now. And I didn't used to. Caroline didn't speak for a long moment. Then she smiled just slightly and reached for my hand again. "You should have been my daughter by blood. But blood never mattered to me. Character did. And you, Evelyn, have more than anyone else in that family. Tears filled my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I just nodded, unable to say much with the lump in my throat. She patted my wrist and said she would take care of it. I didn't know exactly what she meant. I assumed she would talk to Nathan, maybe confront him, maybe not. She never said. Before I left, I helped her sip water, adjusted her blanket, and sat for 10 more minutes while she drifted in and out of sleep. Her breathing was uneven, but she smiled once more before I stood to go. "Come back tomorrow," she whispered. "I want to show you something. I promised I would. I meant it." That night I slept without waking for the first time in weeks. It was a deep sleep, heavy and still. In the morning I made coffee and got dressed in the soft gray sweater she once complimented. I was on my way out the door when the phone rang. Caroline had passed at 7:20 a.m. The nurse said it was peaceful, that she was alone but not afraid. I sat on the edge of my couch for an hour after the call, just holding her photo in my hands. It was one of the last ones we took together, the two of us laughing in her kitchen flour on our faces from a botched pie crust. Later that week, I found out she had called her lawyer at 5:45 p.m. the day I visited. She didn't wait. She didn't hesitate. She'd rewritten the will that same night. No one knew it until the day of the reading. But I knew. Not the details, but the feeling. The final words she gave me weren't about revenge. They were a gift, a kind of justice wrapped in love. She chose me. Even when everything else was falling apart, she still chose me. The lawyer adjusted his tie and cleared his throat. His voice was steady, rehearsed. He looked directly at Nathan before unfolding the papers. "We're here today to read the final will and testament of Caroline Ames, dated and signed 3 days before her passing." There was a pause long enough to let the tension breathe. Nathan leaned back, fingers laced across his stomach. Rebecca sat straighter, her expression poised and pleasant. I didn't move. I already knew. What I didn't know was how much it would hurt to watch them realize. "To my son, Nathaniel Ames." Caroline's voice began from the recording. Her voice filled the room with something colder than grief. "If you're hearing this, I'm gone. And if Rebecca is sitting beside you, I'm not surprised." Nathan blinked. Rebecca's smile faltered. Caroline's tone didn't waver. "You brought deception into my home. You used my kindness as currency. You allowed someone to suffer in silence while you chased comfort. For that, I leave you only this, my disappointment, and a request to reflect on the man you chose to become." Rebecca shifted in her chair, lips pressing thin. Nathan opened his mouth but didn't speak. The lawyer turned to the next page. "To Rebecca Lang," Caroline continued, "I leave nothing. I did not know you well, and what I learned I did not admire. May your future be shaped by your own efforts, not the ruins of someone else's." The little girl beside them, her name was Lily, I remembered, tilted her head confused. "Mommy," she whispered. Rebecca reached for her hand but didn't speak. The lawyer took a slow breath like he was savoring what came next. "To Evelyn Grace Moore, the woman who stood by me when it mattered who told the truth, even when it cost her peace, I leave everything. The house, the lake property, all financial holdings, all assets, the art, the copyrights, the wine collection. Everything has been placed in a living trust in your name." Rebecca's hand dropped. Nathan stood up. "This is a joke," he said. "This can't be right." The lawyer didn't even blink. "I have the original documentation here with signatures and witness statements." The decision was final. I sat still, hands folded in my lap. My heart beat fast, but my face didn't show it. Nathan looked at me for the first time that day, eyes wild with disbelief. I met his stare but said nothing. Caroline's voice returned for one last line. You never asked me to choose Evelyn, but I did. You protected what I built. Now it's your turn to keep it safe. Silence filled the room like fog. Rebecca looked pale. Nathan's shoulders slumped. Lily fidgeted with her bracelet, the only one unaware of the weight in the air. I exhaled slowly, the only sound I allowed myself. Rebecca finally spoke. You manipulated her. You turned her against her own son. The lawyer looked up. Caroline made her own decisions. Evelyn provided evidence, not persuasion. Nathan sat back down hard. His hand trembled as he grabbed his water. He spilled some. No one offered a napkin. The lawyer closed the file. That concludes the reading. If there are questions, they can be addressed through legal counsel. I rose quietly. No words. No theatrics. Just the sound of my chair sliding across the floor. I walked past Nathan and Rebecca without looking down. When I reached the door, I paused, hand on the frame. I said nothing. But in that silence, I think they both heard exactly what needed to be said. Rebecca's voice cracked first. This is theft, she snapped, pointing at the lawyer as if she could erase what had been said by sheer volume. Her cheeks flushed with anger. She stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. I glanced at her once briefly. She was shaking, but not from grief. Nathan tried to recover with words that sounded rehearsed and hollow. Mom must have been confused, he said. Maybe someone pressured her. He looked at me when he said it like I was the answer to a question he didn't have the courage to ask directly. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I walked to the door without looking back. Rebecca's voice followed me. Then Nathan's, then silence. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was heavy and still, the kind that holds more weight than weather. My heels echoed softly on the pavement as I crossed the lot. I heard footsteps quicken behind me. Evelyn, wait. I stopped beside my car but didn't turn around. His voice was closer now. You didn't have to do this. You made her believe I was the villain. I turned slowly, calm and tired. I didn't make her believe anything. She saw what was already there. Nathan stepped forward, eyes pleading and sharp at once. You turned her against me. She was dying and you filled her head with poison. I took a breath and looked him in the eye. You turned her away long before I said a word. You just never noticed. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The wind picked up slightly enough to lift the ends of my coat. He looked smaller than he used to. Or maybe I'd just stopped shrinking myself around him. I got into the car without another glance. He stood there as I pulled out of the lot, one hand hanging at his side, the other limp by his jacket pocket. He didn't shout. He didn't chase. He just stood in the stillness of a moment he never expected to lose, and I drove home lighter than I'd felt in years. The house by the lake was quiet, in a way that felt full, not empty. Mornings began slowly with coffee on the porch and the sound of birds hidden in the trees. I painted the guest room a soft yellow and filled it with light. Caroline's presence lingered not in objects but in warmth. Her books still lined the shelves. I kept her favorite chair by the window where the light touched the fabric just right around 8:30 a.m. I didn't throw anything out in anger. I didn't change the locks or strip the house of memory. I let it breathe. Nathan's name didn't echo here anymore. The spaces he filled with noise had grown quiet, and in that silence, I found myself again. I opened a gallery in town, just small, tucked between a bakery and an antique store. Caroline had once told me my eye for beauty was better than my ability to tolerate nonsense. I used the funds she left to build something that felt more like mine than anything I'd ever had. The first time I saw Nathan again was in a grocery aisle. He looked thinner. He was holding a small girl's hand. Lily, I assumed. She was talking fast, showing him a box of cereal, and he nodded like he was trying to stay in her world. He didn't see me. I didn't make him. Rebecca had left, someone told me later. Something about not being ready for a life that wasn't easy. Nathan stayed. No studio tours, no album launches, just fatherhood. I didn't pity him, but I didn't hate him either. One evening I opened my inbox to find a message with no subject line. It was from Nathan. He wrote that he was sorry, that he'd been selfish, that Caroline's silence in the end said more than her voice ever did. He thanked me for being kind to his mother. He said Lily asked about me sometimes. I read it twice, then closed the window. I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, just clarity. Some stories need an ending, not a continuation, and I had no interest in starting the same chapter twice. Life now was quiet, but not lonely. I went on walks. I laughed more than I used to. Sometimes I caught myself smiling for no reason. Not because everything was perfect, but because for once nothing needed fixing. I didn't win, I healed. There's a difference. It was late afternoon when I found the letter. I had been organizing Caroline's old desk, mostly out of habit. I kept telling myself I'd donate the stationery, eventually clear the drawers. But something always made me stop short of finishing. In the bottom drawer, wedged behind an envelope of clipped recipes, was a folded sheet with my name in the corner and Nathan's written underneath. The paper was dated 3 days before she died. Her handwriting was careful, but a little weaker than usual. The ink wavered in places, but the words were clear. Nathan, if you're reading this, it means I never had the courage to say all of this to your face. I hope part of me still does, but just in case, I want these words to reach you in some form. You were once a boy who brought joy into every room, music in your hands, sunlight in your hair. But you grew into a man who mistook charm for character. You disappointed me. That is the truth. I watched you turn away from a woman who gave you every bit of herself. I watched you discard a life built on love for something built on distraction, and yet I still love you. I am your mother. And because of that, I cannot let my last words to you be only punishment. You chose Rebecca. That is your burden now. But she is not the enemy. She is not innocent either, I know. But she is broken in ways that I began to see near the end. You don't know this, but she came to me once alone the day after Evelyn visited. She sat across from me and cried. Not tears of guilt. Tears of someone who thought they were finally chosen only to realize it meant taking someone else's place. She asked me if love that begins in betrayal can still become real. I didn't answer then, but I wish I had. The answer is maybe. Maybe if it comes with growth, with change, with deep understanding of the pain caused. Evelyn will have control of everything now. She has earned that. But I have included a clause buried where only she can find it if she chooses to look. She holds the power to offer Rebecca something. Not money, not property, but grace. An opening. One that only reveals itself if Rebecca ever becomes the kind of woman who can ask without expectation. It is not forgiveness I am asking Evelyn to give, only the possibility of it should she ever feel ready. That, to me, is the highest form of power. Love is not always soft. Sometimes it must be sharp to be true. But even in sharpness there can be mercy. Caroline, I stared at the letter for a long time, the weight of it sitting heavy in my lap. I hadn't cried when I read the will, not when Nathan emailed, not even when I'd stood in Caroline's empty bedroom months ago. But now reading this, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't pity. It wasn't guilt. It was understanding. Caroline hadn't written this for drama or legacy. She wrote it because she knew that people are rarely one thing. And I had spent months defining Rebecca by her worst moment. It was easier that way. Cleaner. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't rush to find the clause Caroline had mentioned. I didn't know yet if I wanted to. But I knew I would eventually. Not for Rebecca. For myself. Because healing doesn't always mean forgetting. Sometimes it just means letting the door stay unlocked, even if you never open it again. The gallery opened on a sunny afternoon, the light filtering in through wide windows that Caroline had always said made the space feel like it could breathe. I named it after her, of course. Ames and Light. A nod to legacy and to the warmth she left behind. People filled the room slowly, their voices soft, respectful. I wore a pale blue dress she once complimented the one she said made me look like someone who knew where she was going. Art hung on every wall pieces from local artists, some new, some donated. Caroline's favorite painting was framed near the door. A small plaque beneath it read, "In memory of a woman who saw people clearly and chose love anyway." I noticed Lily near the juice table standing next to an older man with silver hair and gentle hands. Nathan's father. He smiled at me with a quiet nod. I returned it. He didn't say much. He never had. But I saw something in his expression that looked like gratitude. Lily walked over holding a cookie and looking up at me with her head tilted. "You made my mommy cry," she said. Her voice wasn't angry, just curious. I knelt a little, meeting her eyes. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they lose something, and sometimes they cry when they realize what they had. She thought about that for a moment, then offered me her cookie. I smiled and shook my head. She turned and ran back to her grandfather, bouncing on her toes as if she hadn't just asked a question big enough to stop my breath for a second. The gallery grew quieter near the end. I stood near the back, watching the light stretch across the floors, the colors shifting like water. It didn't feel like a finish line. It felt like the beginning of something I could finally shape myself. Legacy isn't just blood. It's who stays, who shows up, who protects what matters when no one is looking. Caroline gave me the space to build again. And this time every choice was mine.